it's hard to believe that 2012 was already 10 years ago, and with the NHL Trade Deadline being tomorrow, I decided to turn back the clock. Surprisingly, not much has changed in terms of the quality of the trade deadline. As much like the last several seasons, back in 2012, the trade deadline looked to be anything but exciting, until Buffalo decided to make a splash.
Don and Jackie, for most of the day, the Sabres and the rest of the league were quiet. Then, shortly after the 3 o'clock deadline, the team announced 2 big trades.
Before this point, the deadline was pretty bland and boring, as most of the deals leading up to the 3 o'clock deadline weren't done until minutes later. But when Buffalo traded away a young Zack Kassian and a veteran Paul Galstead, it sent shockwaves across the NHL. First, we have to start off with perhaps the biggest trade of the deadline, highlighted by Buffalo with the Zack Kassian deal. Kassian was drafted just 3 years prior by the Sabres with the 13th pick, and his grit and size is what made him such an attractive package, especially to Canucks general manager Mike Gillis, who was trying to add on pieces to help his team make it back to the finals a year removed from their heartbreaking defeat. Gillis would go on record stating that Zack Kassian was what was missing the year prior during the final due to his physicality and hard-nosed play, and once arriving in Vancouver, he would play his role to a T, racking up a career high in 124 penalty minutes 2 years after the deal was done. But what Buffalo would get in return for Kassian is what also made this move intriguing, as in the midst of an incredible rookie season, centerman Cody Hodgson would get shipped the other way, giving new hope to a Sabres organization headed down the road of a rebuild. Hodgson at the time was widely considered to become something special after seeing his performance during the 2012 season, and it's not often that you see any professional team trade a breakout rookie for what seemed to be pure grit. So this was an extremely bold move by Mike Gillis. 10 years later, Zack Kassian is now an Edmonton Oiler and is still getting under the skin of some of the best in the game today. But as for Hodgson, things aren't as they seemed. After joining Buffalo and producing a career-high 44-point season, a massive decline in his numbers in 2015 was enough for Buffalo to let him go, buying out his contract where he'd only play in one more season in the league before hanging up the skates at the young age of 25. Hodgson revealed his decline in numbers was due to him being diagnosed with malignant hypothermia, which Hodgson described as being a literal struggle to play with. We'll come back to Buffalo in a minute, but first, I want to thank SeatGeek for being the sponsor of today's video. SeatGeek is an app that allows users to purchase tickets to games, concerts, and live events. SeatGeek makes buying tickets simple as they rate them on a scale from 1 to 10, with the higher number being the better of the deals. If you haven't already, make sure to use my promo code IDGT at checkout to save you $20 off your first purchase. Thanks so much for SeatGeek for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's get back into it. I also mentioned that Buffalo would trade away veteran forward Paul Galstead, and the deal ended up being bigger than you would think, as this trade is still benefiting one team to this day, and it isn't the Sabres. Buffalo would ship off Galstead to the Nashville Predators in exchange for a 2012 first-round pick, and at the time, this was a great return for a player Galstead's caliber. Darcy Regere's goal was to acquire a second first-rounder, and he did just that. So the Sabres believed they hit the jackpot, but that didn't end up being the case. Galstead wasn't impressive on the stat sheet, numbers-wise, in Nashville, but he did provide veteran leadership, and his presence was definitely felt, and the first-round pick the Sabres would acquire would be used to select Zemgus Girgensons, who is still an active member of the Sabres, and was actually an all-star, albeit voted in as a meme. But there's one element of the trade that we have yet to discuss, and that being a 2012 4th-round pick that the Predators would acquire. And what could that pick possibly turn into that would have been worth being mentioned? Well, Nashville would use that 4th rounder to select another future all-star in netminder UC Saros, who has recently broken out onto the scene, turning into an elite-level goaltender for the Predators. There were some moves made before the trade deadline that are also worth mentioning, such as the Marek Zidlicki deal between the Wild and Devils, the Coyotes acquiring Antoine Vermette from Columbus. The second part of the Jeff Carter saga would occur, which would ship him off to LA, with Columbus acquiring Jack Johnson, essentially for Couturier, Voracek, and Jeff Carter. And perhaps my favorite trade, which sent Kyle Quincy to the Red Wings for Sebastian Pesce and Andrei Vasilevsky. The Vezina winning returning two-time champion Andrei Vasilevsky, which I find funny because literally moments before the deal took place, Tampa would acquire Quincy for merely Steve Downey. But back to the Jeff Carter trade, because the impact this trade had was major to all three sides involved. After the Flyers failed to win it all in both 2010 and 2011, star forwards Mike Richards and Jeff Carter were both shipped away in hopes for building for the future. Carter would get dealt to the Blue Jackets for a first-round pick and Jacob Voracek. However, Carter wanted absolutely nothing to do with the Jackets organization, so a few days before the 2012 deadline, they would trade him away after just 13 games with the team, and Carter ended up becoming the piece that LA needed to get over the hump, as Carter and his Kings would shock the world, winning the cup as an 8 seed, leaving Columbus with Jack Johnson, a first-round pick, and a Stanley Cup ring on Jeff Carter's finger. But there was another trade made during the actual deadline that helped another team win it all, and that was between the Chicago Blackhawks and the newly revived Winnipeg Jets, where the Hawks would acquire defenseman Johnny Oduya for a 2013 second and third round pick. Oduya's stability on the blue line helped improve an already stacked defensive core, allowing the Blackhawks to dominate a year later, as Oduya and the Hawks would take home the cup in 2013 and then again in 2015, becoming the closest thing to a dynasty the NHL's gotten for a very long time. We're gonna end today's video talking about another Blackhawks trade, as they would ship off a future All-Star MVP for merely a 5th round pick, that being defenseman John Scott. But I didn't bring up this deal just to poke fun at Scott, but because Scott wasn't the player the Rangers were hoping to acquire at that year's deadline. Apparently, the Rangers actually wanted star forward Rick Nash, but the two sides weren't able to negotiate a deal, which I wanted to point out, as just a few months later, they would get Rick Nash, whose impact on Broadway was felt for years to come.
We saw you back in January in Columbus where that happened. It happens tonight here in New York. What was this moment like for you?
It was really special. I mean, just to be a Ranger for all those years, and now to get honored at Madison Square Garden, it was amazing. It was nice to hear the cheers, and I've been booed at both places too, so it was a nice way to finish off.